Hello. Welcome to Season XV of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, we're watching movies from the 90s and talking about how they fit into the larger picture of 90s horror and how each year from that decade stacks up against the others. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Still got that New Year smell. We are taking our first step into the year 1992 on our quest to re-examine the horror movies of the 90s.
Ooh.
I'm excited about it. 91 was a good year. It's currently the front runner, as in ranked higher than 1990.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're taking a trip through the 90s. We're going to do 2 episodes on each year of the 90s and talk about movies that came out that year that were not remakes or sequels and were made on a budget of less than $100,000. Yep, did it again. That should have been $100 million. My bad. In an attempt to give a critical re-examination of a decade that has long been downplayed for its contributions to the horror movie tradition. If that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what will.
It does. But barely. I'm just kidding.
You sound so enthusiastic.
I was reading, for the record, my bad. I was trying to read my note real quick. But, you know, I guess I'm excited.
Okay. Well, I'll see what I can do for you here over the next 20 minutes or
Thanks,
so.
man.
But yeah, so we've been starting off each episode that is in a new year from the 90s by talking about the movies we chose not to talk about. And the reason for that is they aren't eligible based on the rules that we arbitrarily set for this season. So the movies that were not eligible for us to talk about this week from 1992 were Bram Stoker's Dracula and Frankenstein, which were remakes. And then the sequels Pet Sematary 2, Children of the Corn 2, Alien 3, Army of Darkness, which was Evil Dead 3, Hellraiser 3, Critters 4, and Amityville It's About Time. Which is probably my favorite sequel name.
It's about time. That just hits me where it's like, what?
It's about time to wrap up this franchise.
This is like a damn... Yeah, no shit. And they put out like 5 since then.
They're like, all right, we've been putting one of these out every 2 years, but it's been almost 3 years, so it's about time for our biannual Amityville movie.
Yeah, exactly. It's also like, that's like the equivalent of a 90s like action like one-liner.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is a fucking horror movie.
Yeah. Like zoom in on Sylvester Stallone saying, it's about time.
How many people keep moving into the house? Just burn the son of a bitch down. Exactly. Holy shit.
Yeah. After a certain point, yeah. If they don't learn, yeah.
Shame on fool me once kind of thing. Yeah. Like this is a prime example. At that point, you're just wanting to kill people in your family.
I mean, surely it hasn't been the same realtor this whole time.
No, it's the same guy. Yeah.
He's like, this house is great. About every year and a half, we just sell it again.
This is a constant moneymaker, man.
Yeah. So the movie we did decide to talk about this week was called Man Bites Dog. And it is a Belgian film, which I don't think we've ever reviewed before.
Sounded French to me.
They were speaking French, yes.
Oh, that explains it then.
So you are correct.
Why are they speaking Belgium?
Yeah. This one I've read about, like it's been on lists before, but I just hadn't ever sought it out. But it is currently on Max for streaming. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like a good time. It was a little gnarlier than I expected, and then when I looked into it more after the fact, I realized it was an NC-17 movie.
Yeah, definitely
so
was.
So that was an awkward one to like throw on in the background while my wife and I were eating dinner.
Right.
But
who picked
we
out
got
this
through
one?
It was me.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that everyone knew.
No, yes, So I got this. I've got.
I legit panicked when I watched this, and I looked at the original list, and I saw that beautiful little star next to the title.
You knew that it was mine. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, thank God I didn't make this one.
Yeah, I did it. It was me.
It must suck to be you. I'm just kidding.
Well, but I was surprised that something this graphic was on Max, just for anybody to stream. Like it's crazy. Yeah. But apparently, it like won some awards though. Like it was a bit like
the Belgians very were high all about rated. It. People like this movie a lot. I know. Yeah.
And I just feel like dirty after watching it. But anyway, enough about that. I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then you can do your fun facts. And then we will get into the thankfully no men actually bit dogs in this one, but they did just about everything else details. In 1992, the film Man Bites Dog premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. This French-language Belgian film is a dark comedy true crime mockumentary about a film crew who follow a serial killer and document his life. Over the course of the movie, the crew becomes more acclimated to the violence and eventually start taking part in it themselves. What goes around comes around, though, and they all learn that lesson the hard way. This movie was made on a budget of about $33,000 and made about $3.5 million at the box office, despite being given an NC-17 rating in the US. Man Bites Dog can currently be streamed on Max. So,
yep.
What did you learn about this movie?
So, it's more so just a fact about this movie, I guess, that I kind of learned. But it's also a little bit about the podcast and all the history of the podcast and all the fucking bullshit we've gone through and watched. This is the only film that I've ever stopped watching. Yep. I just straight up was just like, you know what? I'm good. But I made it pretty far into it, so.
I would imagine I could guess which scene got you.
Yeah, it was probably like 3/4 of the way through. Like when they broke into the house. But I was just like, it got to a point where I was just like, I've seen everything this movie has to offer, and it's just some fucking dudes just running around. And I was also kind of fucking mad that they were calling this like a black comedy too. And I was like, I have a pretty fucked up sense of humor.
Yeah.
I find a lot of shit funny. I didn't see any jokes in this. I was like, this is I get what black comedies are, but yeah, so this is the first one. But I'm still down to talk about it, obviously.
Yeah. So it was rough. It was real rough. I feel similarly to this as I did when we started talking about Terror Firmer, in that it was uncomfortable to watch, and I would not feel comfortable recommending it to anyone. Basically, if there's anything that is something that really grosses you out or really makes you feel bad when you're watching a movie, it was probably in this one. Mm-hmm. It definitely was trying to be as extreme as it possibly could.
Yeah.
And the high-level premise was just that there's this serial killer who's a somewhat like affable guy who gets along well with people and can be like charming, but also there's a documentary crew following him around as he's sort of describing how he kills people and how he gets rid of the bodies. And he's doing it all in this very like conversational manner that is really creepy, like when you think about what he's saying. But they really just kind of went over the top with the violence and what they showed him doing. Yeah. And I think that it deserved the NC-17 rating.
Yeah. So for me, like, I guess my beef with it is just like, I'm not here for you guys just to try to fucking like just shock value me. Do you know what I mean? And like, I don't have any problem. Like the actual content, the meat of this film is the same. In my opinion, it's the same type of premise as our very first podcast that we ever did about the movie of the home invasion. That I hope you can tell me, because
Funny games.
Funny games. Thank you, Daniel. That's why we're best friends.
I got your back.
But like, it's the same premise, and it's the same premise as strangers. It's a concept that I thoroughly enjoy, of like, just it's evil doing evil things, but there's nothing, there's no meat to it. There's nothing for me to like any of the character, like the main characters in this. Like, there's no, they weren't charming, they weren't funny, they weren't, it was just, in my opinion, I felt like it was just like some guys from college, which is ultimately what this was initially supposed to be, like a college, like, film project, like whatever. And then it turned into this, like, just trying to do some sort of shock factor. And it blows my mind. It blows my mind that this has as high of rating as it is. Yet again, it's not the meat of like what they were doing. It ultimately, I guess it did get down to a point where it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, you're fucking shooting this guy or whatever. It's just like, there's nothing there. I don't know these characters that they're killing. I just know that she's an old lady, and generally they're usually pretty sweet old ladies, so you don't want them to die. But like, there's nothing making me like any characters. And it was just over and over, like, the same shit, I guess. And I think I legit just got to a point where it's like, I get what's happening. I guarantee you the crew's going to die or something. And, it's over with. I still would watch this over Under the Skin, to be very clear. It was legit. Like, that's what I've tried to, like, when I turned it off, it wasn't like me being like, it was a shock factor or anything. It was me just being like, I'm wasting my time at this point. I've seen what you guys are trying to do here. And also, like, the shit you can see on Reddit is way worse because it's real shit. So it's like, okay, congratulations.
Like, if that's what I'm going for, I have other outlets. Yeah.
And it had incredibly messed up scene, like horrific scene. Like, it had horror qualities to it, 100%. It was just, I was just like, I'm good. That was the main thing.
Well, I have a couple of things that I want to talk about that are kind of more around the movie, maybe, that are more interesting. But one thing that I think we wanted to look for over the course of this season were kind of larger trends in horror. A lot of what we've been paying attention to, we're really interested in a lot, especially with last season. It's like, from the Twilight Zone, what inspired what? And then from the season the 13th, when we were looking at the different subgenres and how they developed over time, I want to kind of take that same angle through the 90s. And I know last week we talked about how there was like this resurgence of kind of horror movies that were more geared towards younger kids that you could watch, with the family. And that was kind of happening, from the late 80s into the early 90s. Yeah. Another trend that I feel like I'm seeing, though, is this idea of kind of reality horror almost. And I'll explain what I mean. We had this movie, which was like a fake documentary. We had Ghostwatch, which was a fake, like, public broadcast. And then obviously later on we had Blair Witch, which was like the found footage kind of fake documentary thing, right? And that was sort of the progression in the 90s. But if you'll remember, a couple seasons ago, we watched a movie called Henry, A Portrait of a Serial Killer. And the movie poster for that, I went back and looked at it, and it's called He's Not Freddy, He's Not Jason, He's Real. And the whole idea of that movie was that you had a guy who was just a killer and dangerous, and it followed him in sort of a gritty, up close and personal style while he killed people. And I think that sort of the reality of that probably influenced, like, this movie and others that we would see, because it's a different vibe than the slashers that we saw in the late 70s and 80s, where those were like almost this like larger than life supernatural type villain that was just, even almost like paranormal in that, guy with a knife that can't die, or guy with claws that attacks you in your sleep, right? Like, it was a different type of thing. But then we have this surge of movies where it's like very real, and kind of like you were talking before, where the idea of the home invasion movies are like, you can't talk yourself out of that could happen to me. Whereas, like, what are the odds, this supernatural serial killer is going to come to my neighborhood, right? Like, that
Right.
isn't a thing that keeps me up at night. And so in reading some more about it, I was curious if I could find any evidence of links between those movies. And as it turns out, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer was made in 1986, but it didn't actually hit theaters in the US until 1990. And this was before the internet. So it's not like people knew about this movie that got shot a long time ago, or that only a few people saw at a film festival, right? Like, until it was out there where people could see it, it kind of didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And so I almost feel like that was a little bit of a new era of this type of movie, where it was almost like reality slasher.
Yeah.
But also the idea of just like kind of that colliding with the idea of like a fake documentary, or something that's scary but being presented to you as real. And that goes back, all the way to, The Following is based on true events or whatever. But this one even went as far as to show like, oh, this is an actual documentary. And Ghostwatch at the same time was like, oh yeah, this is an actual live broadcast. And then Blair Witch kind of took the best from all of that and was like, all right, let's make it scary and in the woods and supernatural and completely found footage. Like, all the people who took it died. And then that, like, blew up and almost sort of created a billion copycats on its own. So from a progress of horror movies in the 90s, I think this is kind of an interesting entry, even though the contents are more than horrific.
And to be clear, like, this hits the mark on like, when you and I were texting and you were like, well, as soon as I get to a computer, I'll see like what the movie is, when we were talking about when we were going to record. And like, I saw Was Man Bites Dog, and I looked it up and was so stoked to watch this film, Daniel. Like, legit, I was just like, just from like reading a quick little blurb about it, I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, where, like, what? Like, where'd this come from?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't even know this was a thing. And so, like, the actual concept was the film crew, all that, no issues whatsoever. I thought it was super cool. And I also wondered if that had something to do with me just being okay with like turning it off. Because there's definitely been movies where I'm like, I'm done, but I'm going to finish this because, I don't want to let down you or the podcast or something like that. With this one, I was like, not that I don't want to let you down, but it was just like, I've just seen it. I've just seen what this is about, I guess. Or like, at a certain point, you're just like, it doesn't provide much. So the fact that you figured out that Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer that came out in 86 but wasn't in films in 1990, first off, is very incredible detective work, but it makes so much sense to what we got for the 90s. And it was like, it was almost building up until we got to Blair Witch, which then kind of turned it into found footage style, then set off like a whole genre on itself. Like, we know that found footage happened before Blair Witch, but now that's just like a category. That's a common category in horror films. We get that a lot. Cameras are more available now. Makes sense. With this one, it was, the crew and everything. It super interesting kind of world that they were in, where it was like almost like there's no rules or no laws or something like that. And so like what they developed or what they built was made complete sense. And what happened, like what the content of like what they did within the film, like this crazy things happen, I fully believe would actually happen if that world really existed. If there was any situation where a serial killer would hire like a film crew or something like that, like in reality, that type of world is this movie is exactly what would happen in that case. Like, laws.
You think they'd get pulled into
police
it
aren't. Well, it's just like
him make it look so easy.
Yeah, that, and like police aren't necessarily concerned. Like they were driving around shooting at cars, killing people. Obviously, cops weren't a factor too much. So like, it makes sense of what was happening here. And it ties into the Henry Portrait serial killer, which makes me want to watch that movie again. I like that one. It definitely ties into it. It's interesting to see the progression of what we got when we get into what I feel like is a fully formed found footage film, which is Blair Witch. But yeah, I think, the actual like concept or like the style of film, like how it was filmed, like I thought it was great. If that makes any sense for a guy who just stopped watching it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I thought it was great, but it was like, I've seen this.
Yeah. And again, a lot of my notes are like looking at things that I thought either influenced this or were influenced by it. Mm-hmm. And that scene where he starts talking like super authoritatively about art really reminded me of American Psycho.
In American Buzzsaw. Was that what it was called?
Velvet Buzzsaw?
Velvet Buzzsaw.
The Jake Gyllenhaal one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
About all the art stuff. That's like, I was sitting there thinking like, I bet Jake Gyllenhaal watched this while.
Yeah.
Like that was.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. There were some interesting things where he kind of talks about like killing people who society doesn't care about that I feel like was supposed to be social commentary, but that I don't think was really like the strong point of the movie.
You think? Yeah, I'd like to think that like that was the case, but also like they're just dumb enough to think like or maybe it was 92. Never mind, they get a pass. But nowadays, because like YouTube, you have people doing YouTube pranks and shit like that. You're like, this would just spark so many people doing stupid shit like this.
Yeah,
people,
So
true. It's like, people would watch this, and I think normal people would be like, oh man, we need to like do more like taking care of homeless people or whoever we consider society doesn't care about, but like the other psychopath population would be like, oh yeah, we can get away with killing those people.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
kind of missed the mark in my opinion. Like it's like, I get what you're trying to say here, people.
This was definitely not a positive influence on society. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, I think there were elements in it where they were trying to.
No, but I think that's what they were in an artful way were trying to like accomplish. Like this is definitely an artsy fartsy film in my opinion.
There were some kind of artistic directing choices, if you can take a step back a little bit. So there was the scene where he has the sound guy put the mic up close so you can hear the guy's neck breaking. Yeah. And that's super brutal and like disturbing.
Mission accomplished.
But I did appreciate the way that they stuck to this idea of like the documentary style. Mm-hmm. Which I think it kind of is like a precursor to more of the found footage stuff. But just the idea that it wasn't like you were just watching and he was talking to the camera. It was like he was actually interacting with the crew and the way that they were making the film and stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that was just kind of an interesting thing that I think you obviously saw like a lot in Blair Witch, where they're like interacting with the camera and the person behind the camera is as much a part of the story as the person in front of it. And that's just a really kind of an interesting way of storytelling that I don't feel like we saw a lot of examples of before this one. And then the last one I had in my notes was kind of on that same note, was the scene where he jumps out of the doorway and attacks the mailman after he's got his neck in the brace. And then the guy fights him off and gets away. And then like all of a sudden the scene just rewinds. And then you realize like he's watching it later on a TV screen and like paying attention to the attack and thinking about, what he could have done better and how the guy got away from it and all that. And that I think is a really creative thing from just a directing perspective. Yeah. Of the idea of like taking you out of the scene to making the scene a thing that the people in the movie that you're watching are watching and interacting with. Like that was cool. That may have been after you stopped watching, but yeah. I can tell by the tone of your voice. You're just like, yep.
Yeah. That sounds good. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, there were just some things that were kind of cool about the making of it that I really do think you can draw a line from this one to Blair Witch and some of like the future, like fake documentary, found footage type movies that would become a bigger deal later on.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody is going to admit to being influenced by this movie, so we may never be able to prove it.
Yeah.
But I think I could point to like some what feel like pretty obvious examples.
Yeah. You know, I think another horror positive from this, like a horror movie positive from this, is like the main character, Ben, I feel like is one of the biggest monsters, quote unquote monsters that we've seen. Like this, he is a villain. And if I think that the movie could have been totally different if Ben. So how do I say that? So I think Ben was such a good villain that he could be interchanged with a few different movies as far as like the psychopath nature and all that. Like I think that like they hit the mark on having like a serial killer in this sense. We all feel like we know what serial killers are now because people make money off a true crime that happens. It's amazing. You know, people die and then like you have these podcasters like, dope, let me report on this. So we feel like we know a lot, but you know, maybe they did in the early 90s, but like for everything that you see now with serial killers, like it checked the box, like narcissistic, check, charismatic, check. I mean, like it did everything that you hear about is common with serial killers.
Definitely. It fits the trope for sure.
Yeah. And he was so evil, just so evil in this film. Like he could have been interchanged. Like, I think that was a positive that he did. Like you didn't know up until I stopped watching, like, you know, a lot of the times you didn't know what was going to happen. Like when he yelled and gave the old lady a heart attack, and said, saved a bullet, you know, yelling to give her a heart attack, saying that you noticed that she had heart medicine. That's pretty smart. I saved a bullet. That's the evil genius piece of it right there. Yeah. That's saying that your bullet is worth more than this person's life. And so like, that's the evil genius part of it. And that's why I think that villain, this is going to be one of the number one, if we ever have a list of villains, this has to be up there, man.
Guys you wouldn't want to run into in a dark alley.
No kidding. Well, I would. I'd punch this dude in the face so fast. I don't give a shit.
I couldn't get over how much he looked like Johnny Manziel.
He did. Yeah.
Farmer's fight. So yeah, this was kind of a rough one to start off. I feel like 1992 is going to have to do some work if it wants to catch up with 1991.
Yeah.
But next week we'll be back with the movie that you picked that I'm really excited about, because this was actually number 2 on my list for 1992, which is The Lawnmower Man. I haven't seen it, and I'm excited to watch it and talk to you about it next time.
Well, let's just hope that there's no old ladies being murdered in this. Did you die?
No, I'm fine. I'm just stupid.
Did you pass out?
Nope. Just knocked my phone off the side of the desk.
Oh. Sorry. Here we go. It also is pretty relevant when I was reading about it, because I just read about this. I didn't watch any trailers, so this could be a bad movie, but it's relevant because it involves computers and AI.
The real monsters.
Dun, dun, dun. Not no guy from Belgium speaks French.
Ooh la la.
C'est la vie. C'est la vie.
Buongiorno. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Hey, we'll leave this in. I want to tell a story real quick.
Okay.
I said we're going to leave this in like I'm a bossy bitch. You know what I cringe about today? Every time I see say, the French spelling, the C''EST. You know what I cringe about? Wolf Parade had that song come out.
C'est la vie, way?
Yeah. And I called it Siesta. Over and over and over. Over and over and over. I think I did that until we watched like Eyes Without a Face.
That's amazing.
I'm fairly certain that it was for like when that come out, like 2008 or I don't know. I'm making up numbers now. It's whenever that came out.
Yeah.
To when we did it for the podcast, and I saw this movie and it had that like when I was like, oh my, it's haunting me again. It's here again. I can't pronounce this.
It never. If you said it that way to me, I never picked up on it.
There was one time specifically I remember saying it like repeatedly because they were playing that song at like a bar or someplace, or it was like we were at I can't remember, we were doing something in public and they were playing that and it's like, what? Other people like in Oklahoma know Wolf Parade? And I remember saying it like, and you just kind of nodded, and now it makes when I figured it out, it all this stuff came back. It made sense. I was like, oh my god,
yeah.
He didn't know what the fuck I was talking about.
But yeah.
Anyway.
Well, it's funny because I realized growing up, I read a lot. And so there are a lot of words that I had just never heard out loud until like quite a bit later in life.
Yeah.
And then there have been so many times where I'm just like, well, I've been thinking that one wrong for a long while.
Good point. Yeah.
Not a real robust vocabulary in rural Oklahoma to learn from.
Nah, we don't need too many words around here.
It's weird that we were even taught to read, to be honest with you.
I never learned.
I don't think kids in Oklahoma are even allowed to have books now.
You're not. It's against the rules. You have one book.
Outlawed.
Yep. The Bible.
The good book.